It's on my screen. Oh, okay. All right, I think we're live. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Mom, will appreciate. Okay. Uh-oh, I'm not on the right screen. Well, let me know if you get sick.
Just taking it all in.
Yeah, I should be able to navigate directly.
Your eyes are kind of good.
Hey, so this is what we covered last week, just as a quick review.
I don't have to listen. Keep up.
There we go. That's where we want to be. Yeah, two screens look identical. So we only got through 30 screens last week. We have 69 more to go. So we probably won't finish this week, but last week we started with this discussion of faith and obedience. And I started with that way because those two words are very familiar to us as Christians. Several of you, in fact, all of you, were adamant that faith was critical, that we really couldn't obey God unless we had faith. But that discussion kind of set the scene as we're in this section of the the Tale of Two Kings. One, Ahaz, who has no faith and is not obedient, and Hezekiah, who has faith and is obedient. If you've read anything in the prophets, there's a lot of judgment there, and the judgment is because of violation of the covenant. And primarily two things that God's really concerned about. One is the disobedience of the law, and the other is the lack of faith in Him, as they're seeking idols, they're seeking other strength, through magic and divination, other ways to protect their future rather than trusting God for their future. And we brought up that element of future as when we talked about faith. That faith in the moment is okay, but where faith really is tested is, do I trust God enough for the future that I can be obedient to take this step now? And that's how all those kind of come together. And just to kind of recap what we talked about last week, this was in chapter 7 of Isaiah, that Ahaz was neither faithful nor obedient. But he had a real fear from Assyria, this emerging power to the north and to the east that is threatening other nations, that has a reputation for brutality. In fact, their strategy was to conquer an area and move those people to other areas, to their conquered areas. So their sense of national identity is gone because they're spread out. Move other people from those territories in, and now you have a new nation that's now loyal to Assyria. And they would do that as they go on this march to conquering. And so it's a very real fear that Ahaz has. But he also has a more immediate fear, which is Syria and the northern kingdom, who were threatening him in the southern kingdom. And in fact, he makes this alliance with Assyria to kind of offset that. But Isaiah comes with this message. And what really, really intrigued me about this message was it's what we talk about. While we were yet sinners, God does something. God reaches out. We know that Ahaz is unfaithful, and we know he's disobedient. While he is that, Isaiah reaches out to him. God reaches out to him with a message. And basically the message is, I know your fear is real. I know you're really concerned about your future and your nation's future. But let me assure you. And Ahaz responds, God even says, test me, high or low, give me a test. I will give you some assurance. And Ahaz says, nope, got it covered. I don't want to test the Lord. No, I'm good. I got it covered. I got it covered under my own power, my own ways. I am not going to trust my future to God so that I can take that next step in obedience. I'm going to follow my own way. So 3 takeaways from that. Faith is much to do with our next step. God meets us where we are always. But he doesn't leave us there. It's always to take that next step in obedience. It's always to move forward. And where we were at the end of chapter 7 is God says, okay, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. You know, a virgin will give birth to a son, and before that son comes of age, knows right or wrong, whatever age that is in a short period of time, these 2 stumps of firewood, Syria and the northern kingdom, will be done away with. So that's the first part of the sign. This is what's going to happen. When it happens, I'm telling you about it. When it happens, you will know that I'm true to my word. But the other thing that's going to happen is, because you won't trust me, then Assyria is going to come as well. And they are going to come in force. You know, you aligned with the devil, I think Dorothy said last week, and that's exactly what they did. Had alliance. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move into chapter 8. We're going to kind of read this one together rather than all at once. So I have a few things highlighted. I'll talk about what I've highlighted, but jump in there as you see something else. Remember, we're still in the story of Ahaz. God has just given this sign. This is what's going to happen. And so this is the next step in the story. And Rich, you want to start? You can crane your neck and
The Lord said to me, take a large scroll and write on it with an ordinary pen, Maher Shalah Hashbaz. So I called to Uriah the priest and Zechariah son of Jeberechiah as a reliable witness for me. Then I made love to the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said to me, name him Maher Shalah Hashbaz, for before the boy knows how to say my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the plunder of Samaria will be carried off by the king of Assyria.
okay, so this is the same thing he talked about very well. Normally Cindy would have gotten that one, but you wanted to sit here, and that's the price you had.
That's a good price. Dodge that bullet, Cindy.
Cindy would have passed it on.
Yeah. Tough names for us, but you did a great job with those. Yeah, so he gave him the sign about, you know, a virgin will bring forth a child, and before that child is of age, those stumps of firewood will be gone. And he's kind of repeating that here. And Isaiah brings his 2 children. One of them, the prophetess, is his wife. She conceives and gives birth to Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Did a very good job with that. Quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. Okay, and the other one, which we read about in chapter 7, was Shir Jashbub. A remnant will return. So there's both a promise there of a remnant coming back, but also sort of a promise of what's going to happen in the very near future. Quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. And then let's go on to the next part of this.
The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloh and rejoices over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Therefore, the Lord is about to bring against them the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates. The king of Assyria with all his pomp, it will overflow all its channels, run over all its banks, and sweep on into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, and reaching up to the neck. Its outspread wings will cover the breadth of your land, Emmanuel.
Now, my English teacher would have told me that's a mixed metaphor. Just sitting right there going, yeah, it is.
How's that?
But there's some really neat stuff in here, because this people, Northern Kingdom, that people, that's who this is against. Because this people have rejected, and I love this imagery, the gentle flowing waters of Shiloh. When you are in God's will, when you're in God's presence, there's a peace there. That's gentle flowing water. But what happens when you're not? I will bring against them the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates, pointing to Assyria. And that's what's going to happen. Assyria is going to come and wipe out the Northern Kingdom. But you have this contrast, beautiful contrast there of the water. And in fact, did you raise your hand? Did you? Okay, jump in.
Yeah, to me, is kind of like they chose the flood waters instead of the water of peace.
Yeah,
So God said,
right.
so God said, okay, I'm gonna give you war instead of peace.
Yeah, there's always a choice for us.
Yeah.
Do you take that next step in obedience, or do you?
Stubborn.
You're stubborn, stiff neck. Yeah, exactly. And that's what they're chosen. But water is another one of those threads that winds itself through Isaiah. So, and we'll see quite a bit of that in the last half of the book. But and then finally, that it will sweep into Judah as well. Assyria will be active in Judah. It won't just be the northern kingdom, although they'll be decimated. They'll be wiped out. But they'll sweep into Judah up to your neck.
Mhm.
And you can imagine that, sort of that drowning image there. And the breath of your land, Emmanuel, Judah, where God still dwells, where God still is with you. So I just thought that was a really a neat image there. And again, Assyria will come in, and they will come in quick, and they will be quick to plunder, swift to the spoils of war, which is what he names his son. And we'll get to why he names his son that in just a second.
Can we go back just a
Oh,
second?
I can go back.
That's okay. I just have a question about that first, it's just been eating at me. The prophecy in verse 7, or in chapter 7, the 14, that sign, it talks about a virgin conceiving. But in chapter 8, he said what did it say? I made love to the prophet.
Right.
So that's not answer to the
Well,
chapter
is
7
it the same person? Or is it just an image of a woman will give birth to a child and that, in a short period of time? Is it just, is it a way to imagine a period of time? A woman will give birth and before that child, so in a very short period of time, a poetic image of a passage of
I
time.
just, because it says it's a virgin and we'll call him Emmanuel, I
Right.
feel like that's talking about Jesus.
Right.
But these other kids not.
No, these are Isaiah's kids. Yeah.
And that was his second wife, correct?
I don't know that.
Yeah. First
So,
wife died.
so
this
those,
is the second wife, which assumed she was a virgin.
Okay, I did not know that.
okay. Well, okay, she could have been a virgin when the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. Okay.
What's interesting is that
Could be.
when Matthew allocates that verse and applies that to Jesus,
Mhm.
so that the scripture will be fulfilled. Was that scripture in chapter 7 about Jesus? I don't think so. I think it's about the immediate time. But it's the same idea of there will be deliverance. For the northern, for Judah, there is deliverance because the northern kingdom will be done away with. And Jesus brings us deliverance.
Virgin is translated as an unmarried woman. So maybe a different.
Yeah. And then Dorothy, the next one here.
This is what the Lord says to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread.
The Lord says to me, who's he talking to? Yeah, I think he's talking to Isaiah. Because Isaiah is the focus of this passage. It's his kids, and as we read later, he's to be the witness. So I think it's focused on him. And don't get caught up in Ahaz's fear and Ahaz's conspiracy theories about what's happening and about alliances he's trying to make. Don't you get caught up in that. You are to fear God. That's where your fear needs to be. And I think it's a holy fear, not an anxiety fear. But he's the one with the strength. He's the one with the power. He's the one that directs history. He's the one that protects your future. He's the one that's going to guide you in the right path. So So that's the fear you need to have, not the fear that Ahaz has where everything is crazy. Because, and that's real. It's real in his circumstance. Okay, then let me move on to the next one.
He will
Sure.
be a holy place for both Israel and Judah. He will be a stone that causes people to stumble and a rock that makes them fall. And for the people of Jerusalem, he will be a trap and a snare. Many of them will stumble. They will fall and be broken. They will be snared and captured.
I'm both there on the side, Romans 9:33. But again, Isaiah is laying out this testimony. This is what God's telling me about this situation. He's laying out this testimony, and he's doing it not for him, but for other people to read and hear. And we see this, we begin to see Jesus in these things, something that's going to happen in the future. It'll be a stone that causes people to stumble, a rock that causes them to fall. Stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, I believe is how it's referenced in Romans.
Okay.
And I'm going to let you read the Romans thing, but Paul picks up that image and he argues that God's selecting Israel to be his people, to be his witness to the nations. And it wasn't in vain, even though Israel failed. It wasn't in vain because it ultimately leads to Jesus, who is the perfect sacrifice, the greater than. He's the perfect atonement, the greater than, the perfect witness to the nations, the light to the Gentiles. And for this reason, the gospel to the Gentiles is in line with God's plan. And I think Paul's making that argument in Romans 9, and he quotes Isaiah several times in that passage. So do that one on your own. I was really tempted to go into it, but I'm going to leave that for when I do Romans next year. All right, where are we at, Jerry?
Bind up this testimony of warning and seal up God's instruction among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the descendants of Jacob. I will put my trust in him. Here am I, and the children the Lord has given me, and we are signs and symbols in Israel from the Lord Almighty, who dwells on Mount Zion.
Yeah. So this is where this all ties together. This is Isaiah's testimony for Ahaz for sure, but for future generations as well. Bind this up, keep it, store it, preserve it. And he's already had his two sons to be the witnesses that quick to plunder, quick to spoil, proving that prediction for Assyria is true. But also about the remnant returns, which will become important when we get to the exile. And so his sons are the witnesses of God's interacting with Isaiah. And then Isaiah himself gives his own testimony. I will wait. I will trust. And he admits we are the sign when those around us are anxious and they're worried and they're fearful. We are the sign that God says what he's going to do. God does what he says, and we can have faith in that. We can be obedient on that next step because we can trust the God who makes the promise. And so he is the witness. Now, later in Isaiah, this gets picked up again. You are my witnesses, talking about the nation of Israel, and my servant whom I have chosen, so that you may consider and believe me and understand that I am he. So the nation itself, bearing the testimony of Isaiah, is to be the witnesses to the nation. You are my witnesses, the Lord says. You are how other nations will know about me. You are my witnesses. And then of course, this gets picked up. Picked up also in Acts. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And of course, we follow that, right? We are the you that Jesus is talking about. The apostles for sure, who was his immediate audience, but we are that audience as well. We are the witnesses that God is true and faithful. We are the witnesses that, yes, we have anxiety, but we can lay that out before God, and we lay out that anxiety, we can have peace. Even though we don't understand it, maybe don't even like the outcome, the circumstance, but we understand that God's in control. Our God is faithful. Our God is true.
Mhm.
Our God does what he says. He will complete the promise that he makes. Fulfill the promise that he makes. We are those witnesses. And I just love this image of Isaiah says, this is what God wants me to do. You know, he chose me for this purpose. I am to preach to a nation that doesn't want to hear. I want to preach to a king that is more concerned about his own anxiety and what's going on around him, that he's not listening to God at all. I am to be faithful and to preach. I am to be the witness that God is true. And it's not just for him, but it's for the generations that come. And that's why all of our legacy isn't just the people we interact with today. Because someone talked to your grandmother or grandfather, which led, you know, somewhere down the line to you coming to faith. That legacy that we have as a witness isn't just in today's world. The fruit we bear isn't just because we had a conversation, but it's because we impacted somebody somewhere and that person did something. We go back to the city, I've talked about this before, who was the first one that encouraged Billy Graham after his first sermon, which really wasn't very good. But somebody did.
Right, somebody.
Somebody said, it's okay. It's okay. You did a good job. You know, have courage, go do the next one, you know. Somebody, because I'm sure he wasn't the fabulous preacher he became on the first time out. But somebody said, you can do this. And that's kind of the impact that a witness can have. And so,
His mother.
anyway,
That's what I was.
His mother.
So what now?
Or his
His
wife.
mom.
It could be. It could very well has been his mother. Absolutely. Yeah, or just a man around him that, you know, that took him on the shoulder and said, okay, wasn't the best one, but it's not the last one. So. This is another thread in the tapestry, darkness and light. And I throw that in here because it's going to tie in beautifully with chapter 9. So that's why it's between 8 and 9. But if you think about where Ahaz is, in the midst of all of this happening politically and, you know, militarily around him, this existential threat to his nation, it's all around him. He's in fear. He's trying everything in his power to control his future rather than trusting the God who owns the future. But he's trying everything, the divination, the magic, the incense under every rock and tree, you know, whatever he can do, he's trying to control his future. And we're going to see this contrast that Isaiah plays out between darkness and light. And it's just, it's glorious, I think. And let's get into chapter 9 here and we'll see where that is. And I think we are.
When someone tells you to consult mediums and spiritualists who whimper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Consult God's instruction in the testimony of warning. If anyone who does not speak according to this word, they have no light of dawn.
Well, I certainly highlighted because we're talking about darkness and light, right? What do you know about dawn?
New day.
Beautiful.
Okay, it's new beginning. It's beautiful. What else?
New day.
What happens just before dawn?
It breaks the darkness.
The dark.
Yeah, and it's darkest just before the dawn, right? Sometimes when we need to have faith, it's darkest right before we get that light of dawn. How many of you can manage the day okay? You lay down at night, the lights are out, it's dark, and your eyes are still open because you're thinking about this situation or that situation, or this I should have done, or this I didn't get done, or my kid's doing this, or, you know, my mom's doing that, or whatever the situation is. When we're in darkness, we don't think straight. We just don't. We have anxiety, we have fear, we have worry, we have Ahaz flowing through our veins. We're trying to figure out how we can control our future, rather than laying it before God and saying, I trust you with my future. I will be obedient on the step I have to take tomorrow, whatever the circumstances are. Meshach, Shadrach,
Abednego.
Shadrach's the one I'm missing, and Abednego. What did they say? I don't know if God will save me or not, but he can. And I have faith in that God. I don't know what my circumstances are going to be tomorrow. That business deal may fail. I don't know, but I have faith in God and his love for me and for my future that I can be obedient in that next step.
His will be done.
Right, right. And so Ahaz is coming to this point of utter darkness because he's shutting God out. It's going to be more fearful. It's going to be more challenging for him. He's going to be more anxious about it. And he needs the light of dawn. He needs a glimmer of light. God tried to provide him that. Let me assure you, test me in this, high or low. I will give you some faith. I will give you something to hold on to for that future. But no, I'm choosing the darkness, which is it's sad when you think about it, but that's what happens. And Cass, I think we're to you.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Distressed and hungry, they will roam through the land. When they are famished, they will become enraged and looking forward will curse their king and their God. Then they will look towards the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness.
So what's going to happen? I've turned my back on God. I'm not looking for the light. I'm staying in darkness. And what happens? It gets darker. It gets darker and gloomier. It gets even more scary, more anxious. And then you look at your life and you go, it's God's fault. Right? That's what he's saying here, right? They look upward, they'll curse their king, they'll curse God. It's all their fault. Because we're in darkness. By choice. By choice. You could have chosen a different path. You could have waited for that light of dawn. You could have seen that glimmer of hope. But no, you've chosen to stay on the dark side. And distress and darkness and fearful and gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. I don't know if any of you are scared of the dark. I'm okay with it until you get to a place like a cave where there is no light. And we've done cave tours a time or two, and they turn off the lights, and you really, literally cannot see anything. That is a very, very scary place. And so I just love this imagery of light and darkness that Isaiah is playing out here. And it's describing the heart. He's describing the will of the people involved and how they're dealing with fear. But light and dark is just a beautiful illustration of how that would play out. And we all understand it because we all live in light and we like it. In Florida. We all flee the north where it's dark and gloomy in the wintertime, right?
Right.
So yeah, we understand this. Okay, next little passage here. Oh, sorry. Back up. I missed something. Oh, here's the only thing I missed. So what does Isaiah give us after just painting this image of darkness and gloom? He gives us one of the true gems of Isaiah, which is chapter 9. Now we're ready to go chapter 9. Should have just gone on. But
Nevertheless, there'll be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned.
And we're just going to read through the whole chapter here. This is it's for 7 verses anyway.
You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midland's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor.
Every warrior is used in battle, and every garment
rolled in blood, to be destined for burning, and will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
One more verse.
Over the greatest of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this.
I know that passage is familiar with it because it's, you read this often at Christmas time. But here's my little take on this. Nevertheless, what a great word. The verse before is talking about the darkness and the utter darkness and the gloom. Why? Because you've chosen poorly. You know, you've chosen not to trust me for that next step, but trust in yourselves. And you've led yourself into this place of utter gloom and utter darkness. Nevertheless, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that whoever believes in him. Nevertheless, despite who you are and what you've done, despite your former shame and guilt and all that stuff that we all have, nevertheless, our God is a gracious God and full of mercy. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom. And he points out here, in the future, I will honor Galilee. Well, what's that? We know that. That's New Testament. That's that's Capernaum. That's, you know, Nazareth. That's where Jesus preached. Yeah, they will be honored because that's where it all happens there. And the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And if that doesn't just stir you a little bit, right? Because we've all had those nights where it's dark. We've all had those nights where we've tossed and turned and wonder about our future. We've all had those nights where we turn and what will happen? And then the dawn comes. And with that, maybe we have renewed mercy.
The gospel.
Yeah. The Psalms promise that, right? Mercies are renewed daily. And we no longer will have to walk in that darkness. We can see a great light. And those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And those that went to the poetry thing, this is the antithetical, what's it called? Parallelism.
Parallelism.
Thank you. You're right there.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it really highlights this disparity, the difference between the darkness and the light, right? Just the way it's phrased, walking in darkness, they've seen a great light. Just an absolutely beautiful image. All right, and then the next passage here in 5 and 6, we already read in chapter 2, which was the sort of the that they'll beat their guns into plows into swords and their
Swords into
yeah, thank you.
plowshares.
That's what it is. Right, and it's talking about this end of the war and the violence of war, and there'll be peace. You know, that's a hope that we all have for heaven as well. That you know there will be no more war. And then he uses the image: every warrior's boot is destined for burning, and that'll be fuel for the fire. There will be a peace. Even though you have all of these nations surrounding you, even though there's this threat of Assyria, Northern Kingdom, nevertheless, God is going to have mercy here. God's going to show some grace here. And then this one. The Lord himself will reign with true justice. And it's an emerging hope of light across darkness. But it's not a flood of light. It's a small beginning. It's a child in a manger in a little bitty town. That's the dawning of light that will one day rule the earth. Oh, unto us a child is born. And what a promise it is. A wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. You fear Ahaz? You're worried about these nations around you, your little doubts? Wonderful counselor, giving true counsel, enduring and wise, a mighty God, easily conquering any enemy around, everlasting Father, security, love, a home, a name, belonging. Prince of Peace, your fear eased, your anxiety diminished, so find rest for your worried heart. Oh, man. Wonderful. I'll sing. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? An absolutely beautiful image. You're in this darkness, and there's this dawning light, and it's not a flood, it's a child. And boy, Jesus sort of meets this criteria, does he not? Isaiah is a witness to what God is going to do, so that when it happens, you will know. I'll do after this one. Okay, quiet, so we can pass that. Beautiful the way it comes together.
Isaiah's prediction here, how many years before Jesus was born?
About 700, isn't it?
So this is Ahaz's
700.
around 700,
Yeah.
yeah, so about 700 years, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, I have to do some math there, and I can't do that in my head anymore.
Just curious.
Yeah, the Northern Kingdom goes away at 722, so you figure that it's about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's, Isaiah is the witness, right? The chapter 8, he's the witness to these things, and this is what he's going to witness to. And so he writes this absolutely glorious introduction to the Messiah. We will see of course, a whole lot more of Messiah in Isaiah, but I love this image here of you're in darkness, there's a light coming. Nevertheless. What a hopeful message. I don't want to exclude anything else that you guys have seen in this first 7 verses, so we can do a little recap. Just tell me the verse, I'll jump back to it, and we can.
I have a question. When Isaiah is talking about this messianic vision, 700 years prior, and it's written down, and the Jewish nation is reading all this, and they see it come to pass, they just don't accept it.
Some do, but some don't.
Yeah, and it just,
Yeah.
and there's so many more going on after Isaiah, but it just seems this is so right on,
Right.
so specific, and yet
MacArthur
they're
talks,
lost.
talks in that commentary that I'm doing, that there were like 913 prophecies or something, some large, maybe that was the number of laws. It was a large number of prophecies that had to come true, not just from Isaiah, but from the other prophets that fit Jesus. And I mean, mathematically impossible. And so it has to point to him. So why don't they get it? I don't know. Why don't they still get it? Isaiah's still here.
Yeah.
Isaiah 8:20 in it says, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word.
Yeah.
It is because there is no light in them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in darkness still.
And that's the King James Version.
Yeah.
And that's what he said in that.
Yeah.
And it's different in NIV, but that may be the concept.
Or they're like
too.
Ahaz, they want to do it their way
Right.
and not accept it and do everything the way it was, tradition.
Yeah.
Tradition rather
Yeah.
than change.
Yeah. Oh, and we're challenged by that too. We want to do it our way. At least I do. I don't know about you. You might be a more mature Christian than I am, but I always want to have control. And I'm married to Cindy, so I don't have it very often. But every now and then, I get control of something. But yeah, we're just like him. He's no different than us, really. of us, if we come to faith, Nancy, you talked about coming to faith being a gradual thing. It's the dawning light kind of thing. It's a beautiful image for that. That kind of it's not a, you know, I was an axe murderer and now, I'm a preacher. Well, that happens, but that's not our story. It's like you said last week, it's a gradual revelation of God's revealing himself to us.
And it is beautiful for us on this side, but the people that are hearing this, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. There's one thing here in verse 7.
Gibberish.
It was gibberish.
That's what
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. The government will reign on David's throne. How important that is for the Jewish people, because they track their identity to David and the promise made to David that the scepter will never leave David's house. And of course it doesn't, because Jesus is a descendant of David. And I missed this last point, is this isn't happening because a king made an action. This isn't happening because these nations ran into some sort of difficulty and ended up not being a threat. Now, this happens because it's the zeal of the Lord that's making it happen. The promise, the nevertheless promise, it's because the zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. And that gives us an opportunity to say, okay, he predicted it, he did it. That's the one I can have faith in. That's the one I know can control my future. I can take this next step of obedience.
Promise maker and the promise keeper.
Yeah, exactly that. Well, I had a lot more to say there, I guess, but I'll leave it this way. The rest of chapter 9 is absolutely gorgeous. So I would leave that to you. It talks more about the darkness, which to me helps me understand that it doesn't matter about my past, the darkness that's in my past, that it's a nevertheless for me. Nevertheless, God, in spite of that, God still has a future for me, and God still has light for me. Okay. All right, where are we on time? Oh, okay, we can do this then. This will go a little bit faster. What now? Well, I thought we'd just take a few minutes and complete what happened during Ahaz's reign. We had this image of his faithlessness, and we had God's attempting to give him a mustard seed of faith, to make a different decision, a more obedient decision. We have Isaiah's witness to these things. He's rolled up in a scroll so that when they happen, you can go back to the scroll and say, yes, it was predicted. Here it is. Here's the scroll that says, so God is in control. But I thought what we do is sort of say, all right, that's the story of Ahaz in this comparison of the two kings. But there's a part of the story that I've never read before, and I heard about it from New Testament stuff, but I never really understood what happened or why it happened. And I thought we might take just a little detour and do that. I don't know how many of y'all understand this whole story. And if so, you'll fill in whatever gaps I have, which I'm sure are legendary. But let's just read through it. We're gonna switch over to 2 Kings, starting with 17, and we're just going to read, I don't know, 20 verses or so, 17 to kind of tell the story. And where am I at over here? I think I'm on my Louisville champion up there. Rocky, I think I'm up to you. Can you read that? We can pass it to someone up close. You're pretty far away. Want to pass it up? That's okay. So the next person around the table that can actually read it.
Okay, I'll read it. In the 12th year of the reign of Ahaz over Judah, Hosea, son of Elam, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria 9 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. Marzan, king of Assyria, attacked him, and Hosea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hosea had conspired to send envoys to the king of Egypt, so that he had not paid tribute to the king of Assyria as in the previous years. Therefore, the king of Assyria arrested Hosea and put him in prison.
Okay, so I gave you this very early on. This is the kings of Judah on this side and the kings of Israel, the northern kingdom on this side. And you'll notice that Hoshea is the last name. So we are coming at the end of the northern kingdom. That's what's happening in the reign of Hoshea.
Oh, Hosea, yeah.
Okay. And then Shalmaneser is the king of Assyria and starts to attacking him. And Hoshea, in order to make peace, says, I will become your vassal. And so what a vassal is I will pay you money, a penalty, a fine, every year, and you don't kill me. You know, I will give you money, and that will appease you for now, and you won't attack, you know, my land or my people or my overcoming. And Assyria essentially a taxing authority now, because it's a vassal arrangement, increases the tax. I want more money. I want more money. I want more money. And you're going to deplete all my resources. So Hoshea says, no, I am going to go down to Egypt, make another alliance that I'm not supposed to make, but I'm disobedient. That's what I do. And try to get some alliance that helps me, because I'm going to no longer pay this vassal fee. And Assyria didn't like that, and so he's put into prison. And then we'll continue the story after another click.
Then the king of Assyria invaded the whole land, marched up to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, where the king of Assyria captured Samaria and carried away the Israelites to Assyria, where he settled them in Halah, in Gozan, by the Harbor River, and Habor River, and in the cities of the Medes.
Okay, this is how Assyria conquers a nation. So they go in, they besiege it, and you've probably seen this in old Roman movies where they besiege a city, they wall it off, they cut off its resources. Eventually, they starve to death or die of thirst, and give in. That's what he's done, and he's now conquered them, and he carries away the northern kingdom population to these other lands. And by doing that, they no longer have an identity, because they're no longer a part of that land even. And they're put in other places with other populations. So they're a mixture and a melting pot. We love that word on this side of the pond. And they lose their identity. And then what happens next is here. If I click the correct button, there it is.
All this happened because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They had worshipped other gods and walked in the customs of the nations that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites, as well as the practices introduced by the kings of Israel.
And Isaiah just paints this picture of, okay, let's remember the story here. You started as slaves in Egypt, and I took you out of that. I delivered you from that. I made a covenant with you at Sinai. I brought you to a land that was yours. It was to be yours. I was to go before you. But you chose not to have faith in me for your future, and you chose to be disobedient. Worshipped, there's the faithful part. Walked, there's the obedient part. And rather than following the practices I initiated for you, you're going to follow the people that you didn't drive out, even though you were told to. Okay, so that's sort of what's happening there. We'll keep going here.
Yet through all his prophets and seers, the Lord warned Israel and Judah, saying, turn from your wicked ways and keep my commandments and statutes according to the entire law that I commanded your fathers and delivered to you through my servants, the prophets. But they would not listen, and they stiffened their necks like their fathers, who did not believe the Lord their God.
Again, obedience and faith. They didn't obey the commandments. And they didn't believe, they didn't have faith, they didn't trust God for their future. I'll read that one.
So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained, and even Judah did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but lived according to the customs Israel had introduced. So the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel. He afflicted them and delivered them into the hands of plunderers until he had banished them from his presence.
I'm no longer Emmanuel. Off you go, off you go to these other lands.
Therefore God gave them over in the desires of their hearts to impurity for the desiring of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is forever worthy of praise.
I missed the transition before you read, but that's from Romans, right? And this is the same idea. You've chosen to go a different way. You've chosen to go your own way. You're not faithful. You're not obedient. You're following your own heart, your own passions, your own desires, your own hybrid worship, whatever that you came up with, rather than what we, what we agreed to at Sinai and the covenant that you made with me. You want to go that way? I'll let you go that way. And then Paul reiterates that same idea as he starts Romans. And I am here when you turn back, but I'm not going down that road with you. You're on your own. And that's exactly, Paul has that same idea there. I missed that transition. Okay, back to Kings.
Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns.
Okay, so you understand what's happening here. Their people have been moved to these other nations to mix in, to lose their identity. And then other people get moved into that land they just conquered. Right? And so they have a new identity that's different than it was before. So that's what's happened.
It's to break the bloodline.
Exactly. It wipes them out.
Yeah.
They lose that. Yeah.
Now, when the settlers first lived there, they did not worship the Lord. So he sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So they spoke to the king of Assyria, saying, the peoples that you have removed and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the requirements of the God of the land. Because of this, he has sent lions among them, which are indeed killing them off.
So the people that moved in are complaining to the king of Syria, hey, there's a bunch of lions roaming around here, and we think we pissed off the God, or excuse me, we upset the God of the land. And notice that pagan understanding that somehow the God is tied to the land or to the people that were there, or the God that controls this area. This is why we do idol worship, because that particular God in this particular land, controls things. That's why I want to do magic or divination with that idol, so that they will do something good for me. They will curse this enemy, or they will bless me, or do what have you. And it's not working for us. You settled us here, and we have lions running around, and we don't know what the requirements of this God is. So the Assyrian king says, okay, well, let me send you somebody.
Then the king of Assyria commanded, send back one of the priests you carried off from Samaria, and have him go back to live there and teach the requirements of the God of the land. Nevertheless, the people of each nation continued to make their own gods in the cities where they had settled, and they set them up in the shrines that the people of Samaria had made on the high places.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll send a priest back to kind of teach you the way that the covenant ways, because it's a priest from Israel. I'll send him back, try to teach you that. But we're going to hang on to our idols and our traditions and our places of worship and all those kinds of things, because that's a part of our identity. We're going to hold on to that. But we're gonna try to appease the God that's in this particular territory. So we're gonna have the priest kind of teach us how to appease that God and make things copacetic.
So the new residents worshiped the Lord, but they also appointed for themselves priests of all sorts to serve in the shrines of the high places. They worshiped the Lord, but they also served their own gods according to the customs of the nations from which they had been carried away. To this day, they are still practicing their former customs. None of them worship the Lord or observe the statutes, ordinances, laws, and commandments that the Lord gave the descendants of Jacob, whom he named Israel.
So you understand what's happening. So
Big
people
girl.
move back in, they're bringing in their old worship, they're getting the priest to kind of help them with theirs, but it's not one or the other. It's all in both. It's a hybrid. It's a mixture. It's not pure worship of Yahweh. It's a little bit of that, it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. The God of the crops, okay, I do something for him, whatever. That it's a hybrid worship. And where are they? Where is this happening? It's Samaria, the northern kingdom, Samaria. Oh, now we're getting to the New Testament.
Laws.
All right. I have a note here. I don't know if I'm supposed to do this now. Yeah, Samaritans. So in John 4, the woman at the well, Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well, and the Samaritans are white with harvest. They've been in this hybrid worship experience. They are right because they need that light of dawn for them. They need to see that. And you know that story. The woman encounters Jesus and she asks him some questions. She asks him questions about the Messiah. She asks him questions about worship. And she realizes that he is, because Jesus says, I am him. I am the Messiah. And so she goes back and tells the townspeople. The townspeople come out and they hear Jesus. And they say, it's no longer you that told us, but no, we've heard this for ourselves. And Jesus says, the fields are ripe with harvest. They have heard the good news. They understand that the nevertheless that we talked about earlier is now, and the Messiah is here. And Jesus says, the fields are ripe with harvest. And if you go to Acts 8, I believe it is. Acts 8. Philip, who ministers there, and then Peter and John, who kind of oversee, they go into Samaria, and it is ripe with harvest. The Spirit is pouring out all over that nation. So it's really kind of cool the way the God works through that Samaritan thing. And then the other one is the parable of the Good Samaritan, but he's the hero of the story. He tells them where the neighbor is. But the Jews don't like the Samaritans at all because they're hybrid. They're not pure. They're not us. Racially, they're not us. Worship-wise, they're not us. They have little elements of us, but they're not us. And so that's why you avoid Samaria. All right. This will be our last slide, I think. It has to be the last slide because we're done out of time. So Ahaz rules for 16 years. And in his 12th year, Hoshea comes to power for the northern kingdom, and he reigns for 9 years. And then Hezekiah comes to power somewhere in Hoshea's 3rd year. And by Hezekiah's 6th year, Assyria has wiped out Hoshea and the northern kingdom. So that's sort of the history of what happens after Ahaz at the end of the northern kingdom wipeout. And I really, really struggled because I want the numbers to work out. I had to work with this a little bit and kind of do it on a graph, and they do work out. But if you're struggling with math there, have some fun. It's a good story problem. But that is the story of what happens to the northern kingdom. And where I think this is a good break is we have this picture of Ahaz, faithless and disobedient, and God still having this glorious promise of what's to come. Nevertheless, and you see what the consequences are for the northern kingdom. So this ought to be a great example for Ahaz, but it isn't. He does not turn. His son, however, jump in there.
I was just thinking this goes along with Jeff's message today, the Day of the Dead, and how in Mexico, the gospel's being convoluted by other pagan worship.
Right,
Mhm.
hybridized.
Yeah, the hybridized.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right, well, let's end here and I will close this here in prayer and